Let's have a look at the 4 suprahyoid muscles. Basically, when you look at the anterior triangle of the neck and you look at the neck muscles, they are divided into suprahyoid muscles and infrahyoid muscles. How? Here is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. These are the most obvious muscles on the side of the neck, and here are basically the two main groups of the neck muscles are the suprahyoid muscles, which are over here, and the infrahyoid muscles. How can you differentiate suprahyoid from infrahyoid? Well, for one, the suprahyoid muscles are above the hyoid bone and the infrahyoid are below the hyoid bone, and the infrahyoid muscles actually look like straps. They look like long straps, and that's how you can differentiate them. I'm going to quickly talk about the anterior triangle of the neck muscles. The anterior triangle of the neck muscles is actually the most obvious structure I just mentioned, the SCM, Sternocleidomastoid Muscle, and here, and then basically the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle makes up the lateral border of the anterior triangle of the neck. The midline makes up the middle, and the inferior border of the mandible is what makes the inferior border of the mandible, as you can see here. Okay. 4 suprahyoid muscles, let's go. The 4 suprahyoid muscles you need to know are digastric, stylohyoid, stylo rhymes with mylo, so mylohyoid, and Gino Hyoid. The stylohyoid muscle first. The stylohyoid muscle, the name gives it away, okay, like many of the muscles in anatomy. So the styloid process is where it's going to originate from, here, the styloid process on the temporal bone, and it's going to go to the hyoid. That's it, simple as that. It's going to originate on the styloid process of the temporal bone, and it's going to insert on the lateral surface of the hyoid bone. And what's going to innervate the stylohyoid muscle? I want you to remember double S, so stylo and supra, they both start with S, right? And these both are going to be innervated by cranial nerve 7 or facial nerve. So this is going to be innervated by the facial nerve, nerve 7. Okay, what does the sup have to do with it? The sup comes to here where we're talking about a digastric muscle. The digastric muscle is the muscle that digresses. It splits into an anterior belly and a posterior belly. And one thing to remember is that this would be the posterior belly, the one that's actually more obvious when you tilt your head to the side. This is the posterior belly, and this one that comes up is the anterior belly. And so if we look at the posterior belly, where does it originate from? This one also originates from the temporal bone, but it's going to come from the mastoid notch on the temporal bone, and this is going to be the posterior belly, and it's going to insert on the hyoid bone. And another way to look at it, and then the anterior belly is going to come from here, which is on the mandible. It's going to be in the digastric fossa on the mandible, and it's going to come back to the hyoid bone. This is when you look at diagrams of digastric muscle, and even in the lab, this is kind of like, it forms like a right angle, but it's an obtuse angle, okay, because it comes together. It's a very, very sharp thing, and it meets in the middle of the hyoid bone. This is above the thyroid cartilage. Okay, now the way to remember it is that when something digresses, the one that's at the back, the posterior, is winning. That means the posterior one will be more superficial, and by superficial, we're going to say that the superficial one is also SS, stylohyoid, and the superficial branch of the digastric, superficial, is going to be the posterior. So the posterior is going to be innervated by the facial nerve. Okay, now, the other way to look at it is to just say that it originates, the posterior belly originates from the mastoid notch, and the anterior belly originates from the digastric fossa on the mandible. Okay, that's funny. Okay, now let's look at the mylohyoid muscle. The mylohyoid muscle is this fan-shaped muscle right under our jaw-chin area. This is going to originate mylohyoid. It's going to originate from the mylohyoid line on the mandible, and it's going to insert on the hyoid bone. Then you have, and this is going to be innervated by mandibular nerve V3. I'll tell you a way to remember this. It's quite easy. And then you have Gino Hyoid, and this one is going to originate from the mandible, and it's going to look like this, and it's going to originate from the mental spine on the mandible, insert on the hyoid bone, and it's going to be innervated by C1 and C3. C1 to C2. Okay, here's my way to remember it. AMMA. Basically the mylohyoid and the anterior belly of the digastric muscle, are both going to be innervated by mandibular nerve. So AM, anterior belly, mylohyoid muscle, are going to be innervated by mandibular, MA for mandibular nerve.